Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Hey, psst. Hey, you see that Snickers over there? If no one's looking, you should just take it.
No! Don't listen to him, my son. That would be stealing, and stealing is a sin.
Sin Schmin, it's a friggin' Snickers bar. You deserve to have it. Sinning really satisfies you.
Repent, my child. Virtue is the only real snack worth savoring. For that candy bar is merely a gateway to nougat damnation. Has this ever happened to you?
Listening to the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and you're not sure what to think?
Then we're here to help. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III, and this season on All the Feelings, we're examining the 7 deadly sins.
You know, the fun ones.
And the 7 heavenly virtues.
Which are also a thing. Through personal stories, historical oddities, and way too much embarrassment, we take you on a thrilling journey through all the goods and the bads you hear about in church.
But without all that pesky church stuff. So come join us for All the Feelings Season 9, a sometimes funny podcast about being human. All the sins, all the virtues.
All in one place. Go to allthefeelings.fun to learn more, or subscribe to All the Feelings wherever you get your podcasts.
Game over.
Horror movies get a bad rap. They're cheap thrills, mindless gore, not cinema, blah, blah, blah.
But we here at Sitting in the Dark know better. We know that horror is more than just jump scares and chainsaws. It's a reflection of our deepest fears, our anxieties, Okay, and there's a lot of jump scares and chainsaws.
Join us, Pete Wright, Tommy Metz III, Kyle Olson, and Keenan Diaz, as we cut into the dark heart of horror cinema.
Every episode, we explore a different facet of the genre, from survival horror to home invasions, from zombies to birds. We tickle the tropes, analyze the angles, and sharpen our own axes along the way.
We'll introduce you to the classics that shaped the genre.
And the modern masterpieces that are pushing the boundaries of terror.
Sitting in the Dark is your guide to navigating the terrifying, thrilling, and sometimes hilariously bad world of horror movies.
We'll help you understand why we love to be scared.
And maybe even convert you into a horror fan yourself.
So turn off the lights, close the basement door,
and join us.
Sitting in the dark.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. My friends, the long national nightmare is over. What started as a dream, what became a nightmare, what became a dream again, what has gone on and on and on and on and on. This is the last time you're going to hear us do a full episode on Cobra Kai. Because Cobra Kai is done. And so some of those repeating contrived plot lines, we're only going to get to complain about one more time. In fact, tonight we're actually going to be talking mostly about the actual ethical questions, because we're trying to move away from just doing reviews of these shows. But we have some ethical questions about some of the contrivances and some things we actually quite liked about the last 5 episodes of Cobra Kai. We are here with myself and Taekwondo master, martial arts knowledge extraordinaire, the head of the Ethical Panda Dojo, though I have not had to kill anyone to allow him to take that position, either here or in Korea, Mr. Paul Hoppy. Paul, how are we doing tonight?
Doing pretty good tonight. Yeah. Happy to have completed watching Cobra Kai.
You know, it was a journey, and I'm glad we went on this journey, and I could have skipped about 2/3 of the journey, but we got to the end, and it was an end of a journey, and there we are. I will say that I'm going to try and bring my normal level of sedate, calm attention to important detail. I was under general anesthesia for a unfortunate procedure associated with aging about 2 hours ago, so I am just a little bit loopy. Not allowed to drive a car. I feel fine, but it might affect this podcast. Who knows? We'll find out.
Can't drive a car, can drive a podcast.
There we go. And if I drive it into a wall, it means we don't go on for 2 hours. So, there's some advantages there. So, with all that being said, we're talking obviously about part 3 of season 6, the last part of Cobra Kai, episodes 11 through 15. And If you're listening to this, you may have watched it, you may not have. We are going to spoil a lot of it. But really, it's not really about the plot as much. I think it's just kind of like an overview of the show and the questions it raised and how we feel about it, both in the world of the show, but also I feel like this show, like the creation of it, had a lot to say, and we learned a lot about what happens with shows these days, and how long they go on, and how the plots can change and morph and things like that. So we're going to be talking about both those things. But first, Paul, why don't you just give like a quick summary of what happened and kind of your feelings on how this wrapped up the story?
Yeah. So I'll start, I guess, with the overall summary, which is that as we left it after season 6.2,
Mm-hmm.
Quan had died, and the tournament, the Sekai Taikai, had been canceled, and
Right.
everybody went back to their corners and of the world and resumed their lives.
Right.
And then, due to some agitating, I think by one Terry Silver,
Uh-huh.
the Sekai Taikai ended up being back on, and the overall machinations to make that happen, a lot of them, there, I think, involved a lot of eye rolling on my part.
Mm-hmm.
Once they actually got back into it, I mostly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was basically, a series of fights where there was like, who was supposed to fight who? Like, Samantha was supposed to fight Tori, and then Samantha ended up being like, I'm gonna bow out because I no longer feel. Do you feel like there's any conflict between you and me? I don't know, sorry, it's a Gross Point Blank reference. But
Right.
basically they had resolved their conflict as friends, as people. And
Right.
so Sam was just like, I don't feel like I need to do this. And she was like, Dad, you're going to be so mad. He's like, no, I'm proud of you. Like, you've basically learned the lesson of Miyagi-Do, which is like, martial arts are for not needing to use them,
Right.
essentially. It's like a big point, right? And that's real, by the way, in real life. Like, I've had experiences where somebody kind of wanted to fight, and then like within a second or two, they realized they didn't want to fight.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't had martial arts training, it wasn't like I was like trying to demonstrate it. It's
Right.
just, there's, I think, something in the way you carry yourself and the way you react to some sort of implied physical threat that is
Right.
real,
And I want to bookmark that because I
Yeah.
think we already had the conversation a little bit in previous episodes about this show, of which there have been many, about the difference between I am angry at you, I want to use my body to inflict harm upon you,
Mhm.
and I am an athlete competing in a competition that involves us performing this martial art, which does involve hitting or kicking you, but I'm not doing it because I don't like you. I'm doing it because I want to participate in this sport. And
Yeah.
I at first really didn't like what Samantha did, but then when I saw more of
Hmm.
how it was framed, I liked it. So we'll kind of bookmark that because I think that's an important ethical question about
Awesome.
violence versus competition. But
For sure.
going on with the story itself.
Yeah, so basically Tori's gonna fight Zari in the final, except like there is no Cobra Kai kind of, so it's like, what's up with that?
Right.
Um, and then Robbie's fighting Axel, the big, martial arts machine from the Iron Dragons, who are
Mhm.
the other main, basically they're the remaining villain
Right.
because Cobra Kai kind of has um removed itself in terms of Master Kim killed Grandmaster Kim and took back her dojang. And so, but like they're in the forest in Korea, so they no longer really have
Right. They
anything to do with
they
what's
it was
going on
their
here.
student who died, and they kind of want no more part of this.
Yeah. And Kreese basically just wants Tori to compete because he's like, you should compete. I'm sorry. But like, you don't have to accept my apology. Just
Right.
know that, like, I'm sorry, basically. And there's a whole big thing with Kreese that I think is worth getting into. I'm mostly summarizing the tournament, I think, because those are
Yeah,
kind of the biggest beats in like like structurally,
I think so.
Although I felt like the heart of this season really was actually Kreese going on like an apology tour.
Yeah.
Um, and so where was it? Right. So Robbie's fighting the big dude, and he's getting whooped, and then he's making a comeback, and then the Wolf, Sensei Wolf, who's the head of that dojo, is like, break his leg, basically. So he breaks his leg, and so Robbie's leg is broken, so he can't continue. And as a result, Miyagi-Do isn't going to like replace him as a fighter. And I kind of thought that they were going to like have a replacement at the last minute, but they didn't do that.
Right.
And instead, Miyagi-Do loses. They're eliminated from the tournament, and uh, Iron. What are they? They're Iron what?
Iron Dragons.
Iron Dragon, right?
Yep.
They're they're the like presumptive winners, but then Johnny takes back Cobra Kai, brings Miguel over, and Miguel and Tori both win their fights. But the overall score is tied, so now Johnny has to fight Sensei Wolf and Feng Xiao, and like and he wins, and basically everybody lives happily ever after, except for Kreese and Silver, who blow up on Silver's yacht because Kreese uses his cigar in a merciless fashion.
Which is very, 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 very foreshadowed.
Yeah, they're like, uh, and there's smaller things like Carbon has the baby successfully without any more intervention from the writers, and Johnny proposes just before that, and they get married by a former Cobra Kai member, right, from the Karate Kid, and it's Dimitri and Hawk like make up, and they both go to Caltech together, and there's this whole thing that's like plot related, but I didn't care for with computers and stuff. But the fact that they kind of like got along, lovely. Moon gets back with Dimitri, okay, fine, everybody can be happy. Chosen gets together with like Master Kim, okay, cool. And
I
then,
hate that I know this, but Moon is with Hawk, Yasmin is with Dimitri.
Yeah, my bad. I thought I might be botching that, but
I
then I
didn't think
realized
the
I
teen
didn't care
romance
that
was
much.
ever the
So,
part you were
yeah.
most dialed in on.
If I could have chosen to get any one part of that wrong, it would have been that,
There you
and
go.
not like Chosen's name. And then like Miguel and Sam are going to like schools on 12-hour flight apart. But there's like a nice, no, I want what's best for you. I want you to do what you think, is not like, oh, stay here for me kind of thing, or oh, I'll go with you. And it's like, no, I'll go with you to visit, and then I'll come home and go to my school.
And let's kind of start there, because and this is more on the review side, but I think it's kind of a lot of what the conversation around Cobra Kai has been a conversation about how you make shows. And I feel like in this last half, they kind of pulled themselves back from a lot of the really bad tropey holes and just poor decision making in the writing room. I thought that had been happening for a while now. And one of the first is that there's an awful lot of like low hanging fruit of cliches and tropes and stuff that they chose to break. And especially ones that you and I have talked about that are not just like annoying, but are actually kind of like problematic and not great. One of those being like every pregnancy has like massive complications. Someone who has a pregnant spouse, I really didn't want to see that.
Word.
But another is this idea that like, I like high school romances. I think they're fun to watch. I think they're interesting and can say a lot. But often there's this sort of contrivance of, oh, therefore, like they fell in love in high school and they survived the plot problems that this movie or TV show threw at them. So they must be true love who will go on to be together forever. And like, I like that the show never did like, I like that the show both at the very beginning and at the very end, like it had Danny starts with a wife who is not the girl who was the girlfriend from the original movie.
Although Karate Kid 2 did that. but
yeah, but like it could
they could have been like, oh,
I think there's a love interest in all three movies, so it could have been any of those.
Yeah, exactly. But they didn't. They're like, no, he met someone off camera. And
Chosen actually goes after the love interest from the second movie, and that's a whole other thing.
But then that doesn't work out either.
Right. But yeah, and like I think one of the dumbest things people can do, and like if any 17-year-old are listening to this and you're getting ready to go to the same college as your sweetheart, forgive me if I'm calling you dumb, but I'm calling you a little dumb. Like the number of people I think who go off to college with their sweetheart, with everything, they're like, oh, I'm going to put aside everything to go be with where this person wants to be. like you cut yourself off from a lot. Like, I mean, you don't have to go to college. There's all sorts of different directions people can go. And you and I are best friends from high school who have stayed really close.
Yeah, and who didn't go to the same high school even.
Yeah, we didn't go to the same high school. We definitely didn't go to the same college.
Yeah.
You went to college for like 3
I
weeks.
visited there a while. No, it was longer than that.
But like the point being that like I think it's one of the worst cliches, and I like got viscerally angry when Miguel showed up at the airport where Sammy was getting ready to go to Okinawa, but then he was like, no, I'm not transferring. I'm going to Stanford, which has been my dream. I'm just going to go with you to like help you settle in and spend a couple more weeks. And what I thought was there was a lot of really bad writing in this season, but in one of I thought the best lines, he said like, I know we have to break up soon, but like not, or we have to like.
I don't think he said that.
What he said something about the word soon, of like, that like soon we're going to be apart for a long while.
Right. Yeah.
And what she says is, but soon can wait a little bit longer.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like that. Like, it's like, yeah, we're going to not be up together this whole time, but that's fine. And whereas having Dimitri and Hawk decide to do it because they're best friends who are working on this business model, which, let me just ask you, in a martial arts fight, my impression has always been that split-second decision-making is fairly important. So if there was a computer watching the moves of your opponent, calculating it through like a lightning-fast algorithm, and then you heard a recording in your voice saying left kick, like whatever, how do you think that would affect your combat abilities?
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, it's not
To be
even
clear, this is the
split-second
project that
decision
they're
making.
working on.
It's like actual unconscious competence of like instinctive reaction.
Yeah.
That is most of what actual martial arts performance is, actual fighting. Not that there isn't strategy that can be composed over a somewhat longer time frame, but yeah, having a useful AI would be something like, and this is speaks to the coaching that didn't really exist during the tournament, where they're more like, let's just do locker room speeches. Because kind of a central tenet of Cobra Kai seems to be, the inspiration and the speech that you give someone is like what's going to make them a better fighter, not like they're dropping their right arm,
Right.
Or like, I mean, the most useful thing I ever got from a coach in a fight, which was between rounds, because you can't really do much during rounds, was, try a skipping side kick, back kick, and axe kick combination. And I did. And I hit the dude in the face multiple times, and then the mat was bloody. And like that, like because my coach, who'd had decades more experience than me, recognized that, like, yeah, that's something that'll probably work here. It might not have worked, but it's not like, oh, do this, do that, like, or like this like big inspirational thing. It's like it's you can observe things and then make suggestions, but like, unless it's like, this is the counter that we're going to be working on. Okay, we're going to be throwing a back kick, right? That's like, now, if I do think it's possible to like receive some signal, some external signal that's like, this is the time to do the thing, but there's not time to explain what the thing is.
Right.
And have you do the thing like in time for it to be successful.
Right.
Also, doing a bunch of like midair cartwheels or like flips
Right.
isn't generally that useful in fights either, which,
especially because like the idea of the technology they built is that it allows one person to fight like someone else, so that a person it's kind of like being able to like, okay, I want my batting practice pitcher to throw exactly like Greg Maddux so I can practice batting against Greg Maddux.
Yeah.
The problem is your batting practice pitcher doesn't have the muscle control and memory to know. And so the idea, first of all, that Miguel, who's wearing this thing, could like change his own instincts, but also, now do those things that you can't do, but Axel can do anyway.
Yeah, and like his limbs aren't the same length, and so no, that was preposterous. That was definitely preposterous. Was it more of a contrivance than the fact that just about every storyline wrapped up in a nice bow and everybody lived happily ever after, unless they blew up on a yacht or were murdered by their granddaughter? Not really, but it's more obviously like, oh, well, that literally couldn't happen, as opposed to like, I guess that could happen,
I mean, Have you ever been to a tournament? Have you ever heard of a tournament where if the students end in a tie, the senseis have to fight each other?
I have not. I have not heard of such a thing. There are tournaments where the instructors will also be competing,
Mhm.
and I mean, I've done that. I've competed at a tournament that my students were competing at. It was very uncomfortable. Like in general, it's a very awkward kind of thing,
Yeah.
It's weird also when teachers fight each other. I remember fighting the teacher from another school, and we were fighting, and like there were some of our students were there, and it's like it was weird.
Yeah. You can see it. Well, and again, like I'm sure that like a lot of people are coaches because they're not like I'm sure some coaches are still very much in the prime of their physical abilities, but some are also like, yeah, no, I tell you how to do that because my
Yeah.
back hurts a lot now and my knees are shot. And like,
Yeah, or like, I mean, having trained with multiple gold medalists in Korea, and like when they're in Taekwondo competing shape,
yeah,
they're super thin and very fast. And not like they can't hit hard, but they don't have like a ton of muscle, right?
right,
Because there are weight divisions, and height and reach and speed are like the primary decisive factors,
right.
right?
Because in that, it's the competition. Your goal is to physically make contact, not to hit with enough force to like knock someone down or something like that.
Yeah, and then a lot of these former gold medalists, I mean, I guess you're a gold medalist for life, but like people who won gold medals maybe a decade prior and now are purely instructors, they're like built,
Right,
in a different way, where they've like put on 20, 30 pounds of muscle, and they couldn't compete effectively anymore, probably
right,
they because somebody lighter and thinner, somebody of their weight is going to be much taller and be able to score points really fast.
right.
But they will break you. Like they
Yeah.
like able to do like flying push-ups, like still really able to fight,
Right.
but not in the same sort of competitive way. So it's, as bodies change, I mean, and then yeah, once you get to be 50, 70, 90, your
Right.
body's going to respond differently. But like even just from like the late teens, early 20s, which might be the build for one sport version of a martial art, getting into this is kind of something I was saying in the first third when we were talking about. I was like, yeah, these kids are not going to do well in a but it turned out the whole thing was under 18, which I didn't
Yeah.
understand at that point when I was making that statement.
It was
I
not
still stand by the
explained
fact
in any
that
way, shape, or
the
form. So
people, right, exactly, the people who had been training since they were like 3
yeah.
probably would have had an advantage over the kids who start when they're like 16, you know um
Mhm.
but yeah, I forgot the question.
Well, it's because actually that's what you said as a segue. So let's stay on this idea of the competition because
Hmm.
this was another thing I thought the show wound up doing quite well. And we've talked a lot about how it has seemed like all the way back to the movies, the show has kind of tried to meld two ideas, which is two people who have a conflict want to settle it physically with violence,
Hmm.
and two people want to compete in a sport in which an act that is construed as violent in other contexts is the act by which the sport is decided.
Yeah.
Like boxing, or in this case,
Right.
karate or
Yeah, yeah.
mixed martial arts. And I think that's been a frustration for certainly for myself, and I think for both of us, is that sometimes it's been kind of like assuming that one always has to be the other, and all this kind of stuff, and that so often it was like, oh, I hate you, we're gonna have our karate fights like in school,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and all this kind of stuff. And so when it got to the point where it said that Sam was like, I don't hate Tori anymore, so I don't want to fight her. At first I was going to be really bothered by that
Mm.
because especially because we no longer had anyone who was not cartoonishly evil on the other side.
Mhm.
Um, Zara just dials up the I am an influencer in the
Yeah.
most misogynistic view of influencers that you've ever seen, and I'm going to be terrible and say like the most mean girl that could Instagram a mean girl.
Mhm.
Um, and then Axel is like, no, I want to be a nice guy, but I'm going to snap people's legs. Like it's just and it's
Well, I'm gonna do it and then feel conflicted, and
right,
then feel bad about it later, and not because there was a thing where his
Right, he
teacher
doesn't
was
do it
like,
later, but yeah.
yeah.
But like so it felt to me like, are you really saying that like in a competition your enemies have to all be terrible people or else you don't want to compete with them? But where it got to actually was very much the opposite, I thought, because what I at least took from it, and tell me if you feel the same,
Mm-hmm.
was it was basically saying like, look, no, and that this is part of what Danny was saying that he had learned from Miyagi, is that it is totally fine to compete if you want to compete.
Mm-hmm.
That going into a competition because you're mad at someone is the opposite of what Miyagi-Do is supposed to be all about, because Miyagi-Do is supposed to be about defense when it's not like competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was kind of like helping her get to a point of being like, yeah, I don't want to fight Tori. And then if she still wanted to be a competitor, she could have been like, okay, cool. Now I feel really great about wanting to just compete against my friend. But that the place she got to was like, oh, I never really wanted to be a competitor. I just wanted to beat up all the people who were mean to me and, fight alongside, protect my father's legacy and all this kind of stuff. And that, it felt kind of, especially given that there'd been this kind of like tennis mom aspect to some extent with her relationship with Danny, her being able to be like, yeah, the reasons why I would be in this competition is either to make my dad proud of me or not make him mad at me because I don't want to do what he wants to do, and or to hurt someone who I don't want to hurt anymore. So I'm just not going to be in the competition. And I thought that was actually remarkably healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I think, her journey like throughout the series started from a point of she had trained in karate from a young age, really loved it
Right.
for itself, right? Not so much like as a competitor, not as a fighter, but as an artist, really, as a martial
Right.
artist, and and she grew up with Miyagi like as practically her grandfather, right? I think she
Yeah.
said. And oh, by the way, as much as I hate the like whole bringing up the whole Miyagi thing,
Mhm.
like the one moment that I like teared up in this semi season
Uh-huh.
was when they were talking about his backstory, and that when he beat up that one guy, it was because that guy had taken something from his wife, who was in an internment camp,
Yeah.
and then she had died in the internment. I was like, oh, because like that's not about this story. That's just about the horrors of the world we live in.
Yeah, he was a
And
Japanese American in the 40s. That
yeah,
can be a part of his experience.
exactly. And so but so Sam, like, she was a reluctant participant in all this, but I think when she was really motivated, a lot of it was for some pretty bad reasons.
Right.
And that doesn't mean it was necessarily the wrong thing for her to do, but just like there it was kind of motivated by a lot of negative emotions,
Right.
right? It wasn't like, I want to achieve this or that, I want to demonstrate this or that, I want to compete for the sake of competition, but it was like, the dynamic with her and Tori, and
Mhm.
the whole weird thing with her and Robbie and Miguel early on, which I'm
Yep.
happy that they like really just kind of left that
Yeah.
behind, um and so I think her circle, like her circle is complete, like she really comes around full circle, and like she's going to Okinawa,
Yeah.
right? And like that's very tied into karate, like that's why she's going there, because she um
Well,
because
and it felt like to my sense was like she might take a karate class or two, but it's more she's going to study at this like university in Okinawa where she's going to learn about basically her grandfather's cultures and life
yeah,
and
for sure.
history. And karate is a part of that. But yeah, she's not going to like go to a karate academy. She's going to go to a, college type
Yeah,
place.
yeah, but I mean, like, culturally, it's like,
Yeah.
culturally, she's like a quarter Okinawan, kind of,
Yeah.
like, or like her grandfather is, her sort of adopted grandfather is Okinawan, and
Right.
you know, she misses him, and she wants to know more about like where he came from, basically,
Right.
and where the art that she's practiced for like a decade and a half comes
Yeah.
from, right? And so, so I thought that was a nice way to kind of close off her character arc, because
Yeah.
and not arc, like really circle, kind of like where in a way she comes back to where she was in the beginning, except with a different understanding kind of who she is and what she's interested in.
Yeah.
Okay, it's an arc, I'll call it.
I mean, yeah. Well, I think it's both, because to me, what she basically does is she gets caught up in this cycle of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the show has the cycle go around a few too many times, and it
Yes.
becomes very repetitive.
Yes.
But in the end, she's able to break the cycle. And I feel like that is kind of my best way of explaining how I feel about a lot of the main plot points, is that it
Mhm.
felt like seasons 1 and 2, and maybe a little bit 3, set up these really interesting dynamics that were leading in certain places. And then it was kind of like, and I don't, I'm kind of getting here into the behind the scenes stuff, and I don't know actually what happened, but
Yeah.
a lot of the reports that I've read has been that like LaRusso wanted to get, or no, what's that actor's name? Ralph Macchio wanted to get a lot more involved in the show, but on that, like there were like, polls and stuff that show that like he was the most popular in the show or whatever. And like it became a lot more about his character. And also just, Netflix had a really popular show. They didn't want to end it. And
Yeah.
to me, it felt like what could have been a 2 or 3 season show became a 6-season show. And along the way, we got tied into a lot of like, wait a minute, wasn't the point that Sam was going to break this cycle? And wasn't the point that these other things were going to happen? And wasn't also part of the point that this was mostly Johnny's redemption in the end of the day?
Right.
And it really did feel like the end of the season, they were like, oh, right. Okay. And like, so what you said about like how Johnny becomes head of Cobra Kai again, and
Mhm.
Robbie and Miguel and Tori fight for Cobra Kai, completely and utterly contrived. And
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
dialogue, we both separately came up with the idea that ChatGPT might have written part of the dialogue to get there. It was so bad. But then it gave us the 2 or 3 episode, like, no, here's Johnny's full, like, the end of his arc and the end of his student's arc. And I thought those were really well. And I think same with Sam, it just kind of got like, you could have had Sam had that exact same revelation 4 seasons ago, but it still was great to get it now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I don't know what happened in the writers' room, right?
Yeah,
But
we've noted. We're just
this
speculating.
was a YouTube TV series, right? It was YouTube Red or whatever it was called for the first 2 seasons, and then it got acquired by Netflix, and
Okay.
they
Yeah,
ran
go
it
ahead.
on Netflix, and then made, I think, season 3 forward were Netflix, so it was actually different studio essentially.
Okay.
I may need to look that up to make sure I'm not just like
I'm not doubting you. I
manufacturing.
just not heard a
Yeah.
word about it one way or the other.
Yeah. But like I completely agree that this is something that it was the sort of thing where basically you had an idea, like the first 2 seasons, I think, introduced some, YouTube Red, YouTube Premium. It introduced some interesting ideas. It basically took a couple of characters decades after they'd been left off, which I think very, very rarely works. And I think it totally made it work in the beginning. I mean, I'm not saying it was always brilliant writing, but I think there was a lot going for it, and it was kind of a small show,
Yeah.
that was successful, but it was like it was small in terms of its scope. And then once they started introducing a bunch of people from before, and and there was a big gap actually between the second and third seasons, like almost 2 years. And you've got the pandemic and everything, but also you've
Right.
got the switch from YouTube to Netflix. I think what happened is they're like, oh, we have a franchise, and I mean, Karate Kid was already, started this franchise, right? But like Cobra Kai basically turned into like, now we can have this like, Cobra verse or Karate Kid
Right.
verse, or Miyagi verse. I think that's the word they use.
Yeah.
And like somehow it crosses over with Hitman 4 also. But like what happens, I think, is you have an idea in the beginning of like, here's the overall idea of what we want to do with these characters and this story, right? And then as the show gets more successful, it gets harder and harder to not make more of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's making money. All the people involved in the show are making money. It's selling merchandise, nobody wants to wrap it up. I mean, my understanding is that a show like Breaking Bad, it took like effort to be like, no, this is the end of the show. And then, it wasn't, because there's spin-offs and whatever, but like, but it was like, no, this is the end. We're actually going to end it here,
Right.
and I think like this show suffered from its own success a little bit, where it's like
Yeah.
they could have had a lot of what happened in this third of a season happen in, say, a season 4 or 5, that all the seasons were normal length, and you wouldn't have just like been going in circles and circles and
Yeah.
circles, and so I think there was an idea of here's where we want to end up, but like in order to get there we need to maintain a level of conflict that just made it feel like things were just like people weren't growing like they would,
Right.
and then they would revert to saved form basically.
I think that's a perfect way to put it, because we often talk about the trope of the will they won't they, not like we
Mhm.
specifically in superhero ethics, but in like
Yeah, yeah.
media discussions, and that's most oftenly phrased in terms of a romantic thing of like
Mhm.
these two characters of tension, and a lot of times some of the worst things is where it's not just that they can't let the show end, it's they can't imagine what the show would look like if they resolve that main tension.
Yeah.
And like Chuck is one of my favorite examples of both sides of it, where
Mhm.
for a couple of seasons they kept letting them almost get together, and then for more and more contrived reasons they didn't.
Yeah.
And then finally they did, and they realized, oh wait, we can actually still have a show where they're just
Yeah.
together, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And
And
it
then they
felt,
split them up again, and then they wiped someone's mind, and oh my goodness, what a
but like we got at
anyway,
least a season of them being
spoils
romantic
for Chuck.
together and it just being
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, for sure.
And I think this like I've always kind of known this, but I think this is a good reminder. Like this had a very specific will they won't they,
Yeah.
but it wasn't romantic. Although I
No.
know a lot of fan fiction is written about Johnny and Danny, and that's totally legitimate interpretation too.
Sure.
But it was like can these two high school rivals see past their rivalry, recognize the growth in each other, and also kind of recognize that they've been so kind of balkanized by this feeling of like my way is the only way,
Mhm.
that they can come to a place of both accepting that the other is a legitimate form of karate, but it's not their own, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
And it took a while, and there was like a number of times I think we've said on this podcast, like, oh look, Johnny and Danny are just what you said, are back to factory defaults. Like they,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but I really like the place, because the place they get to is that they're no longer trying to have one united dojo.
Yeah.
That is two different schools of karate, but there's a sense of like, yeah, you can primarily study Cobra Kai, but go learn some Miyagi-Do,
Yeah.
and vice versa, because one's more offense focused and one's more defense focused, and you can focus in one direction, but having a blend of things, like, any good guitarist, like you might be like, I'm going to be the best, punk guitarist ever. Learning some jazz isn't going to hurt, learning some classical, learning some heavy metal, just it's more tools in your repertoire. And I kind of had that feeling at the end with martial arts, and I really appreciated where that got to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a really high percentage of serious martial artists do at some point study something else.
Yeah.
I think I'm sure that in the past I've mentioned that the taekwondo that I studied is in terms of lineage is certainly closer to Cobra Kai in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, it is literally Korean, as is Cobra Kai. And that my teacher trained with someone who did Goju karate, and then that's basically what Miyagi-Do is,
Right.
I think, representative of. And when I learned this later, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense,
Yeah.
And like my teacher would teach us some of that stuff, even though it wasn't really in the core curriculum of Taekwondo. And even though most martial arts have like a lot of kind of ancillary stuff that like you don't learn early on, but it's like, oh, we actually do have grappling in this. We're just
Right.
not in the sport version, but like the martial art often does encompass a lot more than most people think of from the outside.
Right.
But having said that, like there's arts that focus more on circular motions, that focus more on straight line motions, that are more soft styles, hard styles, and that are specialized in kicks and high kicks and flashy kicks, and ones that are mostly hand based. And I have a friend who was from my taekwondo school, went and started doing Krav Maga, and I went and trained with him in Krav Maga for a while, and
yeah,
it made so much sense, because it was like, oh, here's a bunch of ways of getting out of grabs, out of chokes, stuff like that. And then I could just use my taekwondo to hit people after that, as opposed to like learning a whole grappling art. But then I have another friend, another master in Taekwondo, who came up together, and she learned judo and like did judo for, I mean, it's probably going on 20 years now almost,
Yeah.
because like she saw a fight that went to the ground and she's like, oh, well, I need to know what goes on then. Right.
Yeah.
And so learning multiple styles, you can still have a primary style where like, no, this is my main style, but then I'm going to take from this, take from that. I mean, that's basically, Bruce Lee's philosophy, right? He's not the only one, but like Jeet Kune Do is essentially like, you take what works and you leave what doesn't. You
Yeah.
try a lot of things and you're like, oh, this is working for me. I'm going to keep this. I'm going to refine this, and
Right.
then I'm going to take something else from over here and just put it together.
Right.
Um,
And it feels like it's both like that buffet style, but also it's the idea of like abandoning the idea that there's one true way. That like the best martial art for you may not be the best martial art for me, and the best martial art for someone else, and all this kind of stuff.
yeah. And like the best martial art for you now might not be the best martial art for you in 10 or 20 years,
Right.
And like your body changes, like your perspective changes.
Yeah.
A lot of things change, and what you want to get out of a martial art can change. And so, yeah, I really do feel strongly that they did ultimately a great job of wrapping things up and letting, Danny and Johnny accept each other for who they are, appreciate, the other person's perspective, while and like learning from the other person's perspective while
Yeah.
also maintaining their own perspective, maintaining their own character, I think. And this culminates to me in the
Mhm.
last fight scene where Danny's coaching Johnny and like Chosen's like, you should try something else. So Danny tries coaching Johnny in like a Cobra Kai Johnny type style.
Yeah.
And it works. And there's a moment where it feels like the last kick, like Johnny's going to do a crane kick.
Oh God. Yeah.
And then he sweeps the leg.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, he's going to do a crane kick. That's interesting. I'm like, oh no, that was better. That was
Yeah.
definitely better.
Well, especially because there'd already been the foreshadowing of the cigar, and there were
Mhm.
two different moments where we saw them training the crane kick, and I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
no, stop foreshadowing that. So
Yeah.
glad we
That
did the
was
sweep the
that was
leg.
a feint. You got to give them something that is not.
Exactly. And all right, here's the weird analogy tying up a whole bunch of different media together, and you can tell me if you think I'm nuts here. When I was watching all that, because one of the things that I'm struggling with, and I think the writers are struggling with, is Cobra Kai fundamentally bad?
Mm,
Like that's one
Sure.
thing that Danny believed for a long time,
yeah.
was that because by teaching offense, because by teaching attack, that's inherently going to become problematic and overly violent, that it's basically the way of being a bully.
hmm
And while I think there was like a lot of truth to that, honestly, a lot of what I heard in that, because I think it's grappling with a similar issue, is a lot of the, I think, sometimes dogmatic approach that a Jedi can have to the dark side.
Mm.
Of like, the whole like always defend, and like some of the stuff that I've liked most in more recent Star Wars stuff, but it goes all the way back to Revenge of the Sith also, with like, only a Sith deals in absolutes, which is itself an absolute. Like that there's often a lot of hypocrisy there. And to me, where some of the stuff that I've really liked has come out is like, yeah, maybe like that the dark side is a path to all sorts of terrible things. But like we've seen Rey use powers that are thought of as dark side. We saw Kanan Jarrus, considered like one of the greatest Jedi, act out of emotion all the time, act out of attachment all the time, and it not necessarily be the terrible thing. And in the end, one of the last scenes is Johnny kind of like starting up his dojo again, and he's still being a bit of a jerk and a bit of a bully. And I kind of wish it wasn't, but it's just kind of who he is. But he's getting it and kind of like you get the sense that he's doing it because he wants to help people, even though he's, probably gonna make some kid cry at some point pretty soon. But putting that aside, like he points to the stuff on the wall, strike first, strike hard, no mercy, and he reinterprets it somewhat.
Yeah.
And he talks about like, yeah, he specifically says like you could hear these things and use it as justification to become an asshole. And that's the specific words he used. And he said
Yeah.
that that's what he did for an awful long time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. No mercy can be about like not stop, like pushing yourself to the limit,
Mhm.
And like one thing I remember you talking about in a competition is like, when the other person's doing their best to hit you,
Yeah.
It's okay to do their best to hit them back. When they're doing their best to take your money at a poker table, it's okay to, within the rules we've all agreed to, try to take their money back.
Yeah. And like if you're in a spot where it's like, I don't think this person should be fighting, like you should tell your coach or the ref, like, hey, that person shouldn't be fighting. Like they're clearly hurt. Like, call the fight. You know?
Call the fight. Like
Or-
you and I have both talked about like
Yeah.
someone sitting down at the poker table who's clearly drunk and being like, I know I can take all this person's money. This person should not, like, they cannot consent to playing poker right now. Right now. And yeah, so the dark side analogy I know is a little bit of a stretch there, but like, because it's a little more genocidal than Cobra Kai is. I think.
Yeah.
You see where I'm getting with this?
Well, the point is like there's a path of violence and aggression and and maybe anger, and that doesn't always have to stem from or lead to hate.
Yeah.
Sometimes violence is the only effective response to violence, basically. And it doesn't mean it's always the only effective response to violence. It doesn't mean it's a good response to nonviolence, but I think if you're going to be training in violence, because that's what it is, you need to acquire an understanding of the purpose of that violence. Like, what are you planning to use this for? Are you planning to use it for defense, which is basically violence against violence, right? Like counter violence, or are you, and strike first can be not like, I forgot exactly what Johnny said, but like, it can be not like, just go around punching people in the face, but like when somebody's like lining up to do you harm and they're clearly like intent on doing that, like, preemptive violence is often the most effective way of, striking first can also be like a counter attack. Like somebody's attempting to strike you and you hit them first, you're first to the ball, essentially.
And I think at the end there, he also has it somewhat as also just a general life philosophy of like, be aggressive, take action, like go after the thing you want, ask the person out, like don't be a dick about it, but
basically don't get run over in life.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to push everybody around, but it means, advocate for yourself, advocate for other people who are maybe unable to do so for themselves,
Yeah.
Which
and I think it does a good job of kind of showing that I think like Cobra Kai has a lot more potential to lead to like really bad problems.
Yeah.
But like there's an extent to which both Samantha and Danny both sometimes are kind of like letting life pass them by and are not, striking for, they're not taking action in their life, and they need to, both like on the mat, but also just life in general. But also, and I think this is especially true of Samantha, but also somewhat of Danny, there are moments in the show, and these are mostly going back a couple seasons, but where they're pushed to that breaking point where it feels like, when instead of like having a healthy outlet for negative emotions or even just like difficult emotions, you repress and you repress and you repress, and then you snap. And that like, I think at one point, like they have Sam go to Cobra Kai for a while, particularly while she's feeling jealous about this whole like love multi-polyhedral thing that happened.
I don't even know.
But and she talks about like that it gave her a better, because she acts really badly when, it's like teenagers do teenager things. I'm not like saying she's a bad character, but like
Sure.
she has no context for how to deal with being really angry at someone and wanting to lash out. And I just really like that. It was like that, like, yes, these are these two schools, and yes, Cobra Kai's is maybe a little more playing with fire, but it's not inherently bad. And that like Kreese was really bad and Silver was really bad. And Johnny was taken to that place, but as a student, and he came back from it, and that's worth celebrating.
Yeah, as a teacher, he came back from it.
Yeah,
and that leads us to something that I'd really like to talk about. I don't know if you have something directly lined up next, but
I was going to talk about Kreese, which I think is maybe where you're going. But let's see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like Kreese learning a lesson from Johnny, basically, and then supporting him after realizing that he's failed him, and like realizing that silver is basically his greatest failure in terms of creating something dangerous in the world, and then
Yeah.
kind of closing off that loop and like essentially setting Johnny up to move forward in Johnny's own way, you know,
Right.
I thought was really powerful.
Yeah.
Because learning through teaching is a central tenet of martial arts practice. So it was really nice to see not just Kreese, but the other senseis as well, but especially Kreese and Johnny, actually learned so much from their students that they kind of became different people, or that they became like the best versions of themselves.
Yeah. I think so.
Because like, especially like when you're a teacher, it's really easy to get into this like, okay, you're a student, you have a teacher, you train.
Right.
Maybe you get to a point where you're near your teacher's level, and like maybe then you have another teacher, and you ladder up, and at some point, you know, you've got some colleagues, you know, you've got some peers, but
Mhm.
you at some point you're not going to have a teacher, you know,
Right.
whether you've only had one teacher and the teacher dies, or they retire, or you leave and go off on your own, and you just don't have a teacher. So it's like, but it's not like you don't have anything to learn anymore,
Right.
right? And so if you're a teacher and most of your time is spent with your students, it's like, who are you going to learn from? You learn from your students. That doesn't mean they're telling you how to throw a punch or a kick,
Yeah.
right? But like, just like as a person, but and also sometimes as, you know, people can ask questions. People who know the least can ask some of the most surprising questions. That's like,
Oh yeah.
or like, well, I'm trying to explain it this way, and that's worked the last 99 times, but then this person isn't understanding it that way. So like, I have to improve my understanding of the thing to
Uh-huh.
find a way to explain it to that person, or to teach that person, or to see it another way.
In judging for Magic the Gathering and other card
Mhm.
games, it's the exact same. And like there are certain like levels of achievement that you have to have taught others in order to get
Mm.
at. And
Yeah.
it's the same philosophy. And I know that like one thing we talk about a lot is that like it, a new student hasn't learned bad habits. And
Right.
like right now in the judging world, so many of the practices that we do were based in a paper world where we had to hand out match slips to everybody.
Mhm.
And there've been a couple of times where like we've been shifting over to like handling all the like running of a tournament electronically, but we still did some things just out of habit. And then like a new person would be like, who'd never done the paper system would be like, wait, why
Yeah.
are we doing this? And
Right.
someone in charge would be like, I have no idea why we're doing it. I'm doing it because we do it.
Because this is the way it has always been
Yeah.
done.
No, but pulling it back to Kreese, I totally agree with that. And I love that. I think it's a very like martial arts and learning kind of thing that he learns like that. And for me, it also puts paid to what was one of my biggest concerns about the end of the last part of the season, which is that like, you know, as we've talked about, they've been constantly upping the stakes and upping the stakes and upping the stakes. And what is the higher stake than putting a student into a coma? It's having a student die.
Yeah.
Like that is the penultimate stake, you know, other than like starting a land war in Asia because of the martial arts. But like, you know, like that's where we're gonna go. No Princess Bride references needed.
Yeah, just don't go against the Sicilian with death on the line.
Yeah. And like I was really worried that they weren't going to give that event the attention that I thought it needed. And I thought the fact that the Sekai Taikai was canceled felt very earned and very real, and that a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't want it to continue. The speed with which it went back on was a little silly, but fair
I
enough.
think it was months. I think it was supposed to be months, though.
Well, but in terms of the speed of like, it looks like it was one phone conversation, and then you know, in terms of what
Oh,
we
sure.
saw.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think very, very intentionally, the person who was most affected by it, and I think kind of broken by it, was Kreese.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or fixed by it.
yeah, I mean that too. Like, and for those who haven't seen it or don't remember, like the student dies because like a major brawl breaks out. Kreese, like while all the people are fighting, gets his knife and brings it into the situation, planning to stab Silver, I believe.
Yeah.
Because those two have been kind of at war for all these reasons. And then the knife gets knocked out of his hand, and Kreese's young student grabs the knife and tries to kill someone, and in what I've coined as the new version of jumping over the shark, falls on his own knife. And
in what, let's just remind people, was like an atrocity of a plot point. Like just that whole sequence of dropping the knife. It was like, oh my
it was
goodness.
so contrived. It was so badly done. but I feel like at least they paid it off
Yeah.
because like what happened was I feel like you're right. For Kreese, there are 3 key students in his life. There's Johnny, who he has always seen as a failure in that like Johnny, he thinks quit,
Mhm.
but eventually comes to understand like, no, all the bad things about Johnny were things that Kreese taught him,
Yeah.
and that Johnny has now overcome that and become the better person. There's Silver, as you said, who's the one who became even worse than Kreese. And then there's the kid who he killed. Like who or he took actions because as I saw it, it was never really spelled out too much, but I think that's good because I think it was subtle enough that I could still get it. It I don't think Kreese was like, "Oh my god, I brought in the knife and thus this kid died." I think it's that he was like, "I taught this kid, hate your enemy, no mercy whatsoever, kill or be killed." And so of course this idiot kid took a knife into this fight and died. And like
Yeah.
that's the way he feels responsible for his death.
I
I
think
think
so.
very like legitimately. And I feel like that's the thing that kind of pushes him into seeing like and he spends this last season on an apology tour. Um
Yeah.
that at first I kept waiting for the shoe to drop of like what's his secret plot.
Mm.
But once you realize like no, he really means this. I think it was very much about what happened with Quan lets him really understand what happened with Johnny and thus want to apologize to Johnny, want to apologize to Tori, want to apologize to all these people he's hurt.
What do you think about the none of his apologies were really like accepted? Like he didn't really have that kind of like redemption
Yeah.
that I know it just feels like it fits in with kind of things you said about like somebody does all these horrible things and then they like say they're sorry and do like one nice thing and like everyone's like, oh, okay, everything's great. Like how did that feel to you in terms of
It felt much better,
yeah.
like, especially Johnny's response, because and his apology to Johnny is so heartfelt because
Yeah.
we saw from the very beginning, and like, if you only watch the first Karate Kid movie, you never see this, but the second Karate Kid movie starts literally minutes after the end of the first one, where Danny is in the parking lot going out to like celebrate his great victory, and he sees like 16, 17-year-old Johnny being abusively attacked, both like verbally and physically, by his coach, Kreese,
Yeah.
in ways that are like, oh, okay, go directly to therapy. This is gonna fuck you up for your entire life.
Yeah.
Especially with what a fucked up dad he also had and all that kind of stuff. And like, and then a lot of Johnny's Johnny's own drama was learning, I think, again, to end the cycle of violence of either wanting to please Kreese or wanting to prove that he's better than Kreese.
Yeah.
And being able to just put Kreese aside totally. And to me, it perfectly lined up that Kreese gives him this apology, explains that he knows just all the way he hurts him, but also because Johnny's gone through that, Johnny no longer needs Kreese's approval.
Yeah.
And Johnny's like, he's not mean to him necessarily, but
Yeah.
he's like, okay, I gotta go take care of a fight,
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think of it?
Yeah, it felt right to me, like
Yeah.
I wanted them mostly it was Tori and Johnny, right?
Right.
Um Silver wasn't so much of an apology, more apologizing to the world for
Yep.
for having created Silver or led him in that direction. But um I wanted them to like listen to him
Yeah.
because like not that I felt like they should in terms of like where they're coming from, their history with him, but that he wasn't asking for forgiveness, you know.
Yeah.
He just wanted them to know that he was sorry. He
Right.
wanted them to know that he had come around to understanding
Yeah.
not like their point of view and what he had done that had caused harm. And like to me that's something that like I really wish we had more of that,
Yeah.
where it's not like the person apologizing shouldn't be trying to gain something out of the apology,
Yeah.
It's like it's an apology for the sake of the apology because it's true, it's honest, and it's what needs to be said because it's true. Um and so it just felt right to me,
Yeah.
and I do think that they probably appreciated it on some level
Mhm.
and over time probably would more.
Yeah.
but that he didn't need them to appreciate it, and they just now they know kind of, that that's like where he ended.
Well,
And
to me, there's two real points there. One, just on this idea of like not needing something. I've been rewatching ER recently because it's kind of like
Mhm.
just like fun background TV, and watching The Pit got me into it. And there's a scene early in I think like partway through season 1 where one of the young doctors has a situation where a woman is dying, and he kind of like blows off the husband's concerns and the husband's like desire to better understand the situation, and
Yeah.
like it's not that he could have like saved her life, but he makes the experience of like her death a lot worse for the husband.
Yeah.
And like the husband yells at him about this, and he feels really guilty about it. And so he goes to her funeral, and then like as they're walking away from the gravesite, he goes up to the husband and gives this apology that is clearly heartfelt. And I was feeling myself getting mad at the show because I was like, I feel like the show is saying he's doing a nice thing here, but this feels really inappropriate.
Mhm.
And instead, he gives his whole apology, and the guy just looks at him and goes, doctor, today isn't about you,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
walks right off. And I was just like, that actually is perfect. And
Yeah.
I don't think I put it together until I was listening to what you were saying. I think the thing was that what Kreese does is it's not just that he says he was sorry, it's that he said he's wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Because with both Johnny and Tori, he said terrible things to them about who they are that have clearly haunted them for a long time.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think with Johnny, he's already kind of overcome it. Tori, actually, I realize I think he does have a big effect on, because I think it's his speech to her largely that convinces her to go back and fight and
Right.
participate in the competition. And um and
But he's basically like, you should do this for you.
right, exactly.
Like, don't do this for me, don't do this for anybody else. You should do this for you because it's something you've put in so much work in,
Right.
and like that I'm pretty sure you do actually want to do. So like,
Right.
kind
Yeah,
of
I think she's the
forget
exact
me.
opposite of where Sammy is. Like,
Yeah,
she wants the competition.
exactly.
And I will say to kind of well, actually, is there anything else you want to say about Kreese then? Because I want to say something about how that competition played out.
No, I think that's pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah.
I do, on some level, I like the idea that like Robbie and Sam don't need to fight anymore, but Tori and Miguel do. Um but it also felt a little weird in how it was kind of set up. And one thing we talked about a lot last
You mean
time.
you mean Robbie and Tori do need to fight more?
No, let me take the whole thing again.
Yeah.
So and just go a little more on the Tori thing. I will say that I really liked this idea that like, Sam doesn't want to fight, Tori does want to fight, Robbie does want to fight but gets beaten, and then Miguel wants to fight and wins.
Mhm.
And like they've set up a lot of things about like Robbie versus Miguel, and how they're like each of them is like in some way a son to Johnny. Like one is much more of an adopted son and he's kind of closer to in some ways, and the
Yeah.
other is his biological son, and all this complexity, and
Yeah.
we've had a lot of it. And the fact that Tori is kind of the opposite of Sam there, of like, no, she wants to compete. And they set up something nice also of like, one of the things we talked about a lot last season was this idea that like, Stanford was only going to let him in if he wins this tournament. And
Yeah.
I love that like he gets the letter of acceptance before the fight is over, like,
Mhm.
which was a really nice, like, no, Stanford's not going to care about like this one specific competition.
Well, I mean, they definitely could, like,
Yeah, but like,
extracurricular things, particularly on, like, a high level, like, this is supposed to be some internationally televised, thing,
sure.
like.
But I think like if you came on second place, you're out. But if you come in first, you're in. Like that level of
Fair
like,
enough.
I have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
win or I won't get
Yeah.
in.
Right.
But they have kind of set it up as like Miguel and Sam are going to get to go off to college and have this really nice life.
Yeah.
And then Robbie and Tori are like, well, they're high school dropouts, and clearly if they're not good enough to get into an Ivy League or Stanford school, there's no other options for them. And then I think the most contrived moment of the entire show, which is saying so much.
That's a high bar, and I'm not gonna agree with this one, but go ahead.
Okay, top
You've set
three
it up.
maybe.
You've set it
Someone
up.
comes up to them and is like, "Hey, I liked how you fought. Can I offer you the fame and fortune contract that the Muppets wanted?
Mhm.
Sign here, and you'll be our new influencers, and have lots of life-changing money and get to go around the world and basically do all the things that the woman from Iron Dragons she didn't like was doing, but not be a mean girl about it. It just felt so like, well, they don't go to college, they're going to do this other thing instead. And like, there's nothing wrong with that, but just the split of like college or a job, like, or I'm sorry, best colleges in the world or a job. And it being so contrived, just the whole
Not a
thing just made me
job,
laugh.
a career.
A career. Right,
Yeah,
because
I
that
think
company will stick with them for years and years, right up to the moment they make a single like badly understood tweet.
I mean, okay. In terms of the dichotomy between either you get into like an Ivy League school or a top tier school, or like, you know, you're working at the Cinnabon or whatever.
Right.
I mean, I agree with you on that point. In terms of it actually being that contrived, I don't like. There are multi-million-dollar sponsorships for people who do things that other people like to watch. Like that's very real.
Oh, yeah.
And if this completely contrived tournament that really doesn't exist existed the way that they're putting it forward as existing, there would absolutely be not just like one random person like that. There would be like multiple companies being like, do you have representation? There would be like agents and managers and whatever trying to get in touch with them. Now they probably would have done that before they won whatever fight or whatever,
Right.
But I don't find that contrived in the larger sense in terms of beat by beat storytelling. It was a little,
yeah, I mean, no,
I
like
feel that, but
there are people who have that contract for Magic the Gathering. Like
right.
these totally things exist, but like all of those people probably got like one sponsorship gig, and then like sponsored to like have their social media like there's a process generally, not like you go from 0 to life-changing career numbers. It just the way it was set up felt so very like here's the happy ending with one quick signature.
Well, they don't actually say what the amount is, right?
They didn't. They said it was life-changing career numbers.
Sure.
Which
could just be like 6 figures. That could be like low 6 figures to a high school kid,
Yeah, no, I think that I think it was about like 50 to 100,000. Like I think it's
that seems completely credible to me in terms of what they built up this tournament to supposedly be.
Okay.
Internationally televised event, and in a world that supposedly there are martial arts events like this going around. Like, I that doesn't strain credulity with me the way it seems to with you.
I think it's in part because they're like very much we want you to be a personality for us. We want you to be on and they have no idea if those people are any good at that, and like the ability to be a social media influencer based on your ability to do these things really well is very much not the same as your ability to do those things really well. That's and just the way it was offered instead of like, hey, we want to give you these opportunities and see how it goes, and like, if things go well, we could bring you on a full-time basis. Like that would have made a lot. It just felt very like complete. If you'd had like, again, like to me, I think if the character of Zara had been less like cartoonishly bad,
sure,
to the point where she like drunk, takes advantage of Johnny when she's drunk, not Johnny, of like Robbie, and then like rubs her face in it and all this stuff.
Sure,
like if Tori had a conversation with her about like what is that like, and like you saw that like plant the seed of interest, and like
sure,
that I think they could have set it up a lot more rather than it just being the end of the Muppet movie. Here's your fame and fortune contract that it felt like.
Yeah. I guess I still don't find it as I'm sure it's not any more realistic to how a situation like that would play out than any of the martial arts fights were.
That's fair. That's
fair. But like, I mean, I know a lot of people in the poker world who have like sponsorships, and a lot of them, it's not necessarily like these people are, highly skilled social media experts. It really is a lot of the time like somebody is not so much that somebody is just so good at the thing, but like they're known for being so
Yeah.
good at the thing, you know, and it's like they had that moment or whatever,
Right.
you know, on camera and whatever. So I could definitely see some companies, whatever, trying to, you know, cash in on something. But like,
Yeah.
you know, also there, you know, we didn't see the fine print, you know.
It's a dumb thing to get upset about, but it was just but no, it was much more. How do you feel about the overall idea though of like two of our people go off to these top name
Mhm.
colleges and the other two like go off and thus have like karate as their career going forward?
Um, yeah, that seems fine to me. You know,
Mhm.
I don't. I'm a little disappointed that none of the students clearly became teachers. You
Yeah.
know, because I think that would have been a much more. I kind of thought Miguel would maybe because of the way he was coaching Robbie in Robbie's fight. I kind of thought
Yeah.
Miguel was maybe going to become a teacher, like a martial arts instructor, you know.
Yeah.
And if he didn't, you know, obviously, like, you know, Stanford isn't the only college. And I mean, you know, my opinion of the education system is not particularly
Right.
flattering, you know. I I I I certainly agree with the ridiculousness of, well, either you get into one of these schools or like, you know, your prospects are dim. Like
Right.
people get into these schools and their prospects are dim after they graduate, you know. That's the world we live in. Speaking of which, like, did you here was my biggest thing.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay,
Let me
there's
just
the
say one
whole
more thing on what you were just saying then.
yeah,
But yeah,
sure.
I like
No, this isn't a big thing.
A scene of Miguel like starting a student chapter at Stanford of Cobra Kai, you know?
Yeah, that would have been cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then I feel like I didn't need like a denouement like that long, you
Yeah,
know.
no, exactly.
But
So,
I but that would have been a cool scene. You know, you could have just gone like cut, 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 like montage type deal, right?
yeah.
Because you know, they showed Danny doing stuff, right? And he's still
Mhm.
teaching and whatever. Um, here was my thing that I thought was the least believable in this season. Do you really believe that in today's economy, Tori, with all of her financial struggles, could really afford a dozen eggs?
Pre-Trump, yes. Post-Trump, no.
Okay,
Not
okay,
not in
okay.
the world we're going
I
to.
guess this was filmed a while ago, so
Yeah.
I was
I
just like, she can't afford eggs. Also, like only one vegan vendor. No, I
Yeah, no,
uh,
I specifically wrote to Paul when I'd see all that. I know they'd seen it already, and I was like, "Come on, yeah, that is actually a legit fight. There should be multiple."
I will
Let me
say
ask,
if I had ever had a vegan vendor at any of the martial arts events I'd gone to, I would have been thrilled. So
yeah, but New York 20 years ago, 30 years ago versus Southern California today.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Anywhere 20 years ago, to be
yeah,
honest, compared to Southern California
the
today.
last thing I'll just say is because I think actually you reminded me of kind of what I was trying to get at. Um, they did kind of it did feel a little bit odd. Like Robbie and Tori connected in part because they came from much more like lower class broken home kind of situation. And I say
Mhm.
that like phrase like it's probably a much better phrase than broken home. It's not that, but like both of them had parents who were addicts or were like really having a lot of problematic behavior. And like clearly Danny, Samantha and her brother grew up in a much more affluent situation than
Mm.
Miguel did. But Miguel had like, a mother who was helping him with his homework and was like, at least like middle class of some degree or another, and in a much better situation. So I kind of would have liked it if like Tori or Robbie had also gotten to go to college or something like,
Oh, sure,
um,
yeah.
I think it was part of that stratification that also made it feel kind of weird.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't mean they can't go to college necessarily. You know, they can take a
Yeah.
year off and do their thing, and then they can go to college. And I mean, I think colleges often have martial art. I mean, they'll have martial arts clubs for sure, but they might have
Oh
competition
yeah.
teams or whatever. So that certainly seems like,
Well, especially in the fantasy world where people in bars are gathering around all over the world to watch
yeah,
these
yeah,
great
yeah,
teams.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness.
It was like World Cup level event. I was like, this is
But
impressive.
here's the thing, like people watch boxing, the pay-per-view, whatever, it's not absurd to think that that's something that could happen. It's just not something that does happen.
I mean, like to watch like adults do it, yeah, totally believable. But like very few people watch the like 16-year-old Golden Gloves, like
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, but I mean, like Olympics, people certainly watch teenagers in the Olympics.
Oh yeah, sure.
Um, So I do think a sort of one-off event like that was actually literally supposed to be the best in the world.
Right.
Um, I think there's a lot of things that could be broadcast and promoted
Yeah.
in a way that people would watch them that aren't, you know? I mean, we I don't want to like diverge a long tangent about like women's sports or whatever, you know?
Mhm.
But like I think that's something where, 20 years ago a lot of people thought, "Oh, nobody's ever going to watch that," you
Yeah.
know? And like some people did obviously, but like where depending on something how something's marketed, how it's promoted, ho what the access is like to it, I think
Yep. Later
you
this
you
summer,
never
the women's rugby league in the United States is getting started, and Minnesota has one of the first 6 teams. I'm totally
Mhm.
planning to buy season tickets because, like, I love rugby and women's rugby is awesome.
Yeah, and so my point is mostly just like we never really know what the market for something is
Yeah, I
until
agree.
there's a legitimate effort made to market it, right?
Yeah,
And there's always conjecture, but a lot of times the conjecture is dismissive, right?
yeah,
And then a lot of times that dismissiveness is proven to be wrong,
yeah,
and so, do we live in a world where something like this is currently getting televised and tons of people are watching it? No. Um, is it that hard to envision a world where something like this did actually become a big thing and like a ton of people watched it? I don't think it's that hard.
yeah,
It's not the world we live in.
yeah.
But this is a world where Tori can afford eggs. So.
That's fair, that's fair. Alright, we've gone on for a while. There's actually 2 other last quick things I'm gonna do. So, everyone, I'm basically giving all the bonus content now. We're not gonna have bonus content at the end of this episode necessarily, but there's 2 other quick hits I wanna bring up. Um, One, just again on they avoided the low-hanging fruit. One of the things you and I talked about earlier this season was this hope that, like, the fighting was all gonna be on the mat, that we're gonna get away from these, like,
Yeah.
sword fights in people's homes and, like, mass melees in schools. And so as we get set up that the final fight is gonna be Johnny against, Sensei Lawrence for Sensei Wolf and all that, and then we get, Silver on his boat being "Mwahaha." He's plotting this, like,
Oh
plan to
yeah.
kidnap Johnny's wife and daughter, and I was like, "Oh my god, don't do this."
I was not here for that.
And
I
then
was like,
Kreese
what
shows
are
up
we
and is just like,
doing?
"Nope, we're just gonna have our fight now." And I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
thank God." Like, I was
Yeah.
so happy for that. But then the last one, I kinda wanna ask you about this because I think it's you were saying earlier that, like, a coach can't do much, but one thing a coach can do is be like, "Hey, like, this person's, like, favoring their left side," or, like, when they do, like, this kick, they kind of pause for a second and, like, this part of their body's exposed. And I know enough about sports to know that that's how it works.
Mhm.
And so I was really annoyed that the only time a coach did that,
Mhm.
the coach was like, "Yeah, there's this one moment where his back is exposed. Break his back."
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
it was like, and so as a result, the kid doesn't take advantage of the vulnerability in the slightest
Yeah.
and winds up losing. And this is Axel against Miguel. And again, that was to me where it was like, if you want to compete, if you really want to compete, you're evil.
Right.
Because yes, trying to intentionally do harm to their spine is horrific. But like, if the back's a legitimate target and they're leaving their back vulnerable to an attack, a coach pointing that out to a kid and the kid taking advantage, that seems completely legitimate, right?
Well, you're not allowed to hit to the back,
Okay,
so
that's fair.
no. But that doesn't mean you can't take advantage of it. You know,
Right,
like there would be a more nuanced, like, well, he's got a back injury, so when he does this or that, his body doesn't move quite the same way or whatever.
right,
Or just like a bunch of body shots might hurt the back.
right.
Um, it's I completely agree with the overall point though. That's
Yeah,
like so the only actual strategic coaching or like tactical coaching, right? Where it's like
right.
try this technique that really was ever brought was like, use an illegal attack to permanently injure your opponent. It's like, well, that's no, that come
Yeah.
on, you know.
But like,
Um,
to me, like, even if like the person's going in with an injury, like, okay,
yeah,
let's say like your opponent's right elbow was hurt a month ago,
yeah,
as a result, they're not getting their right hand high enough to defend their head the way they are their
Yeah.
left. Focusing on attacking their right side is not considered cheating. You're not like,
Not at all. Yeah.
kicking the elbow to hurt specifically might not be the greatest, but like, hey, they have an injury that's meaning they're not doing their best. I'm going to focus on that. Yeah, that's legit.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, and causing an injury, even that's not through illegal techniques. Like, I mean, in Taekwondo, like you can just sidekick someone in the arm. Like, if blocking hurts the blocker a lot of
Yeah.
the time, a hard block, right? I mean, it can hurt the person who's striking, depending on how you're doing the block, and it can be a soft block that doesn't really cause any impact to speak of. But you know, you can hit someone's guard over and over and over and either cause bruising that like they're not going to want to block in the same way anymore,
Right.
or is going to cause fatigue and they're going to drop their guard, and then you clip them in the face or whatever. And that's not, or like you have an opponent who's like got a broken right foot and you're like, oh well, they're not going to kick you with that foot,
Right.
or like
Yeah. You can go a little to that side and not.
Yeah.
I mean, people who know boxing know about like Muhammad Ali. One of his biggest strategies when he went up against some bigger opponents was the whole like rope-a-dope of like,
yeah,
let them tire themselves out punching you in the arms.
exactly.
And I remember I got in an argument with someone about this once. Who was like, oh, so Muhammad Ali wasn't really a good physical fighter, just mentally outthought. But I was like, he had 12 rounds of being punched in the arms.
Yeah.
And
No,
kept his
that's
arms up. Like that's
yeah.
really impressive.
Yeah. That's not some random person just trying to do that sort of rope-a-dope. Like their arms are going to get pummeled. They're going to drop their arms. They're going to get punched in the face eventually. That's what's going to happen. Yeah, for sure. But so, yeah, I think taking advantage of someone else's injury is not, it could be viewed as sort of a dishonorable, whatever. There's a scene in Ip Man 4 where Donnie Yen, Ip Man is like injured. And the other guy's like, oh, I see you have an injury there. So I will also put that hand behind my back, and then they fight sort of on even ground. But like, if you're in a competition, you're not doing that. So yeah, taking advantage of an injury, not by using illegal striking, but just playing within the rules is generally,
Clearly the part that I was missing was that kicking them in the back in general is not allowed. And I get
exactly
that if the strategy is, hey, do this thing where you might get like docked a point because you accidentally kick them in the back, but you'll also end their ability to fight. Yeah, clearly that's not cool.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I think this is a good conversation. I am glad we went on this journey. I could have enjoyed this journey if it was a couple of stops shorter. I think a 3-season Cobra. If I go back and rewatch Cobra Kai, I'm probably watching like seasons 1 and 2 and the end of season 7. Like,
1, 2, and like 6.3, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it could have been a nice 3 or 4 season arc. I mean, probably 4. I think you could get 4 good seasons.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of the stuff you did once. The problem was just how many times they went to the same well.
Right.
The last note's just like, I had an argument about red mats, blue mats. I won. We got the red mats. They were great.
Yep.
The musical cues were on point.
Oh yeah.
And I thought it was funny seeing Kevin Burkhardt and Ryan Clark, where Kevin Burkhardt was on the Mets baseball channel back in like 2006 as like a reporter in the crowd, like secondary kind of announcer, and like now he's like he's a big enough international or national broadcaster that like he has a cameo in Cobra Kai. I think it's funny.
To be a little bit of proud, like, oh, you guys know that's my
it's like, oh, he made good,
exactly. Last thing I'll say was two last things. I do wish we'd gotten a Neil Patrick Harris cameo. For those who don't know, like part of how this all started was that in How I Met Your Mother, the character of Barney, played by Neil Patrick Harris, was obsessed with Johnny and like thought that Johnny was the hero of that movie. And like the actor William Zabka like showed up in that as Johnny, and that kind of like sparked this like cultural moment of like, yeah, Johnny Lawrence, we loved him. Why don't we hear about him more often? And the writers of the show have said that moment led directly to this show.
Right.
So, like, I would have loved to have Barney show up as like one of the people cheering Johnny on or something.
For sure.
And then, don't remember the last thing. So we'll just sign off there. Thank you, Paul, so much for being a part of this. Thank you to everybody.
Pleasure.
Live long and prosper.
Sweep the leg.
The Starfleet Federation would not allow that.